I'm Kevin Arba. I'm an astrologer, a coach, and a healer. If you're interested in connecting with me, if you have any questions, any comments, if you're interested in a reading or you're curious about what a reading even is, if you have anything you want to say to me at all, by all means, just reach out to me. You can email me at info@cosmicintegrationhealing.com. You can also check out my website, cosmicintegrationhealing.com. I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody. It's free of charge. I love talking about this stuff. I love to meet people. So if you feel like there's anything that you have to share with me, anything that you are curious about, just reach out. I'd love to talk to you.
And just to add to that, Kevin, if anybody has any specific astrology questions, please email Kevin, and, we may even potentially invite you on to this, podcast that we do, and actually look at your specific chart and, invite you onto the Zoom so that, you could be part of the conversation. So definitely reach out, because we're hoping to kind of grow this astrology community, and really engage with people. Welcome. And today we're going to be talking about progressions and how they can be used in predictive astrology. And astrologer Kevin Arba is going to be using his chart and astro.com to teach us what progressions are, and again, how to use them for predictive astrology.
In predictive astrology, typically astrologers look at transits, and I would say that transits are the go-to, the most important thing. There's also the most, if you take all of the predictive factors, which in my system would include transits, it would also include eclipses. And so then you could look at the transits of the nodes would be, it would correspond to eclipses. And if the eclipses happen to particularly make conjunctions, though could also be with lunar eclipses in particular square. If a lunar eclipse is square to somebody's sun or moon, that's especially if it's like within a degree of exactly square. I find that to be pretty important. But then so those are the most commonly looked at predictive factors. But I also have found that progressions, and there are two different types of progressions. I've heard of a third type of progression on astro.com. It's in the menu of charts. I think it's called tertiary progressions. I don't understand how it works, and I haven't been able to find any relevance to it, though whoever created it did, and that's why it's on there. So I assume that there is something to be discovered there. I haven't found it yet, so I'm not going to attempt to teach that. And then the solar return chart. So you could look at four things in predictive astrology, and if you want, there are two progress charts. So transits being number one, eclipses being number two. And then what's called secondary progressions on astro.com is just called the progress chart. And then what's commonly referred to as primary directions on astro.com is called solar arc direction or progression, solar arc something. We'll see it in the chart. And then the solar return chart. So I find the two different types of progress charts, what's commonly referred to as secondary progressions on astro.com, the progress chart. I would say there are relevant factors in that on an average of once every 5 to 10 years per person. The primary directions, or also known as solar arc direction, I'd say it's more like once every 10 years that I find something relevant with that. And those two overlap in that the primary directions or solar arc direction is based on the movement of the progressed sun. So traditionally it was taught as the entire chart, like you can imagine. So here's your chart, right? The whole chart would move 1 degree per year. But to be more precise, the whole chart moves at the rate that the progressed sun moves, which is not going to be exactly 1 degree. If you're born in the winter, it will be slightly more than 1 degree per year. If you're born in the summer, it will be slightly less than 1 degree per year. the summer is roughly 2 days longer than the winter in the northern hemisphere. So then it would be opposite in the southern hemisphere. So the sun in both of those progress charts would be at the exact same place. In the primary directions, you just progress everything at the same rate as the progressed sun, to where secondary progressions, also known as the progress chart at astro.com, is correlating 1 day after your birth to 1 year of life. So you could use the ephemeris for the year you were born and just look at, where everything moves, right? And so you could say, like, I'm 38 years old. I could look 38 days after I was born. And in the ephemeris, that will give you like an approximate of where everything would be. Now we have these computers that do it. It'll be precise on a computer, because an ephemeris won't tell you the exact movement of the moon over the course of a day. And so the progressed moon would move on average 12 degrees per year in the progress chart, in the secondary progressions. So there are certain more simple systems of astrology which really just look at the progressed moon. Particularly like when the progressed moon changes sign or house, they would say, oh, your progressed moon is in this sign. That means you're working on themes of that sign. I have not found that to be true at all. I personally, in my own life, as well as the people I know, don't see any correlation to the sign that the progressed moon happens to be in. I haven't noticed anything with that. What I have noticed is that when there are exact aspects within the progress chart, this is the secondary progression, which is the more commonly used progress chart. When there's an exact aspect to something else in the progress chart, or a planet in the progress chart, which is typically going to be the sun, the moon, or one of the inner planets. I'll explain why. Those could also make an exact aspect to something in the natal chart. And so I'm explaining all of this now verbally. We're actually going to take a look at a chart. We're going to look at my chart. I have some things going on in my chart, so it'll be easy to teach it. And I have studied my chart, so I could know exactly how to find things in different points in time to teach this from. So typically in the secondary progressions or the progress chart on astro.com, you're going to be looking at the movement of the sun, the moon, and the inner planets. That's Mercury, Venus, and Mars. In the primary direction, aka solar arc direction, you're going to be looking at the outer planets. The reason being is that in the normal progress chart or the secondary progressions, the outer planets don't really move much. Say you live to be like 80 years old. Over the course of 80 days, the planets like Saturn may move like 4 or 5 degrees, right? I'm 38, so Saturn in my progress chart has moved like maybe 3 degrees. Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto have all moved. Like I think my Neptune's moved about 1 degree. I think my Uranus has moved like 1.5 degrees, maybe 2. So there's something to be looked at there. Like it can be relevant, especially if a natal aspect is like within 2 degrees, and then that slower moving outer planet progresses into an exact, like down to the minute. Then that would be relevant. But aside from that example, you're not going to see much of importance in the movement of the outer planets. Now, to where the movement of the inner planets, like say your progressed Mercury or Venus or Mars, will cover quite a bit of ground. Mercury and Venus, depending on where it is in its cycle, moves faster than the sun at some points. To where Mars moves somewhere between 1/3 to 2/3 of a degree per day. So in the progress chart, that would be per year. So then in the solar arc direction or primary direction chart, you can see a progression from an outer planet. And when there's a progression from an outer planet that makes a conjunction to the sun, moon, or ascendant, that is very important. It's important when it hits anything in your chart, but typically what I found, it's really just the conjunctions in the solar arc direction chart as compared to the secondary progression or the progress chart. It could be any aspect, including sextiles, squares, trines, oppositions. They all seem to be relevant. And so oppositions and squares, it may also be relevant in the primary direction chart or the solar arc direction chart, but I haven't noticed anything significant as of yet. So I'm going to put it out there that maybe I just haven't seen it yet, and that perhaps it could be relevant. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen. All right, so here's in your chart selection. This is where the date becomes particularly relevant. So if you're forecasting, I suggest starting with today's date, just looking at where things are. And if you have just a rough sense of how fast things move, so in the progress chart, the sun would move 1 degree per year, the moon roughly 12 degrees per year. The Mars, Venus, and Mercury kind of depends, could be anywhere from 1/3 of a degree to Mercury could move almost 2 degrees per year when it's moving at its fastest. Venus, its fastest is like 1.5 degrees per year. So you just pull down, and then we're going to look at progress chart. If you're doing a reading for someone else or even for yourself and you don't have your own chart memorized, I happen to know exactly where everything is in my chart. We'll look at both. You can also do the natal and progressed. And so in the natal and progressed, what it'll do is it'll pull up your natal chart, and then on the outside, it will show the progressions. So it'll show the progressions in the same way that it would show the transits. If you just had, if you just click the with transits button in the top right. I don't prefer this method because it doesn't show the aspects. So I prefer this. So that's what I'll teach from, but I'll show you the other one as well. So here it is. I guess maybe I'll also just I'll pull up my birth chart here. What I have found also to be relevant regarding houses, so this is my birth chart, is that when a planet in the progress chart where it's progressing, it's far more relevant the natal house that it happens to be in. So like, as you can see here, Mars and Venus in my progress chart are closely conjunct within 0.5 degree. That's quite relevant. In my birth chart, they're 12 degrees apart. So Mercury in my progress chart has slowed down. It will go retrograde. I think in my progress chart, it'll be like 20 years from now. So like I was born roughly 2 months before Venus went retrograde. And so for that month or so prior to Venus going retrograde, it slows down. Normally at full speed, it's moving around 1 degree per year, maybe a little more. And then in that month or so before it goes retrograde, it slows down to the point where it's moving, at roughly the same speed as Mars. And then right before it goes retrograde, it slows way down to where it's going, 0.5 degree a day, and then 1/4 degree per day, and then being essentially stationary. So this in my birth chart is my 9th house, and it's very near my midheaven. My midheaven's at 29 degrees. So this is significant here for me in that these planets are now approaching my midheaven. And they will cross exactly over my midheaven in about 2.5 years. Um, that's of particular relevance for me because I'm also getting 3 transits to my midheaven. Neptune. So transiting Neptune is actually exactly conjunct this group right here, and that counts. So the progress chart can also receive transits. It's particularly relevant with the progressed sun. So like if you were to get like this printout report from astro.com, it's like $50 or something. It's really long. It includes transits to your progress chart. I got it years ago. So it was a lot even for me. I don't think I actually read the whole thing. Just to show you in my progress chart, and here's my progress sun. So my progress sun is in my 8th house, my natal 8th house. It's in the progress 6th house, but in my birth chart, this would be my 8th house. That's particularly relevant. And when that progress sun changes house or sign, that's also relevant. So it'll change sign once every 30 years. It's going to happen between 2 and 4 times in a person's lifetime. For me, it'll change houses a number of times because in my birth chart, these houses over here in the upper right quadrant are fairly small. It started off in my 6th house. It's already changed house twice. When I'm around 60 years old, it'll then move into the 9th house as well. So I remember when it crossed over into my 8th house, and I had other stuff going on with eclipses and things at that point in my life. Wasn't that? It's like 3 years ago. And I remember it was very potent energy. I really felt like kind of a. Remember, I had like a deep healing experience. It was very transformational, and there's a lot of intense, challenging circumstances with people in my life and where I was living and things of that sort. So, in my progress chart, you have an exact aspect. Actually, I didn't even realize Mars and Saturn, which are square in my birth chart and also line up with my nodes in my birth chart. So my natal node is at 27 degrees. My natal Saturn is at 24 degrees. So now Saturn has progressed into close to an exact conjunction to my south node. And then my south node has progressed into almost a conjunction with my natal Saturn. And so now Saturn and Venus have progressed into a sextile with my natal north node and a trine to my natal south node, and as well as a trine to my natal Saturn. And then the other one here is Mercury and Jupiter will be exactly conjunct in about a year, a little more than a year. Also, when they make their exact conjunction, it will also be within a degree of exact sextile to progressed Venus and Mars, to progressed Saturn, as well as to my natal nodes. And at that time, my progressed moon will be first making a conjunction to my progressed node, then to my natal node at 27 degrees. So you have this structure that's all going on here. In addition to that, Jupiter transiting Jupiter and Uranus are in Taurus here. Will be transiting over this point at the same time, as well as Neptune, and then the North Node and Saturn are going to be transiting over my midheaven in the upcoming 2 years. And so you have all of this activity at these points. And so just looking at the transits would be significant, but then you add 4 progressed planets as well, or you could even, you could include my progressed Saturn, as well as the progressed moon, all making contact with what would make like a trapezoid like shape. And in addition to that, transiting Pluto's here at the end of Capricorn. So transiting Pluto is actually conjunct my progressed Jupiter right now. Yeah, and my progressed Mercury will be progressing kind of very close to transiting Pluto, because transiting Pluto is now slowing down. It's going to take 20 years to move through Aquarius, so it'll be moving. Interestingly, when I'm about 60 years old, you'll have transiting Pluto as well as the progressed Sun, Moon, and Mercury all kind of meeting up here at the final degree of Aquarius and the first degree of Pisces. So, that's also something that as an astrologer doing predictive work, you can see if you're just looking at transits, like there's stuff to be seen there. It's significant. But then when you add this progress chart and you overlay it, there's a lot more information to be included. And from what I understand, any science, I think of astrology as a science. It's also an art, but I think it's important that we look at it scientifically. And the scientific method is you formulate a theory and then you test it. And so just in my experience, and I'm going to continue to test this, I found that when I see things in a progress chart, they actually correspond in a very similar fashion to if there were transits, involving the same planets. And what I've also found is that when there's a number of factors, if you're looking at transits and progressions, they're happening simultaneously, and it's so much where it's like, oh, there's just too much information to even attempt a prediction. What I've found is that you can just make the prediction that like something significant is going to happen here. And it's probably not going to be just one thing, though. If it is just one thing, it'll be particularly significant. Hopefully not an upsetting experience. So it's always a possibility. For me, I'm looking at my North Node and midheaven. So I'm predicting in my life something to do, which includes the transiting North Node going over my midheaven. Something with my life purpose and career is going to change. In my birth chart, my midheaven here, the 29 degrees of Pisces, is square to my sun, as well as my moon, which is my ascendant's ruler, and Neptune, which is the midheaven's ruler. So transits to my midheaven, while they have an impact on my career, are not necessarily easy. There's an element of challenge that comes with that. So that's also to be considered. While I expect things to happen to be significant, very often when there's a change, it's because something's not working, or the ego resists change. And so that's also just kind of part of this dynamic of what I share with my clients. And I also do my best to live through as consciously as possible in my own life. I believe, especially when I see something like this, and you can see my North Node here is at 27 degrees and my Saturn here is about 24 degrees. So this hasn't come exact in the progress chart. My progressed Saturn is exactly 27 degrees and 0 minutes. So it will progress to 27 degrees and 11 minutes at some point in the future. I think it's going to be like 10, 20 years, as well as the progressed nodes will get to 23 degrees and 45 minutes, probably going to be like 10, 15 years. But it's also, that's relevant information. In doing predictive work, the more information, the more complexity that you're able to consider, the more likely that your interpretation or your predictions will be accurate. I believe so much of this garbage astrology that is so easy to find on social media is garbage because these astrologers just aren't considering enough information. They're just looking at one or two things. And they're saying, oh, this one thing is happening. There's an eclipse in Taurus. Therefore, something's going to happen with the financial system. It's like, well, let's look at what else is going on here. And so, if you're looking at like how it's affecting America, you can look at America's birth chart, and America also has a progress chart. Interestingly.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think before the pandemic actually happened, that was what astrologers were saying was January 2020, everybody was predicting a collapse. Not everyone, but a lot of astrologers were predicting a collapse in the financial system.
When you're looking at how something will affect the world, what I find to be useful is to look at the house that corresponds to the sign. And so for Capricorn, that would be 10th house. And so for an individual, that would be your career and public persona. But for the world, you could look at government. You could also look at like work, career, just in like a macro perspective. And so from that perspective, you know, the economy then is very much about like jobs, you know, and productivity, GDP, that kind of thing. So that was hugely affected by COVID. And so if you made your prediction, these astrologers were more vague in what they predicted, they would have been right. You know, if they would have just said the economy is going to be affected in a significant way, they would have been spot on. I think everybody's trying to reproduce what Robert Hand did with 9/11. You know, and it's like Robert Hand apparently called 9/11, said there would be a terrorist attack. I think he was probably more like September 5th, which was when the full moon was. 9/11 actually happened more closely to the quarter moon. After the full moon, it would have been the waning quarter moon, if I remember correctly. But that full moon was square to the Saturn-Pluto opposition. And so I assume that's what Robert Hand was looking at, which the Saturn-Pluto opposition would have also been right at America's ascendant and descendant, and depending on what chart you're using for America's houses and ascendant.
And we did a video on the Saturn-Pluto opposition and conjunction, because 9/11 was the opposition, and then pandemic COVID was the conjunction.
Yeah, and AIDS was the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Prior to that, World War I began at a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, then World War II, and the atom bomb happened, ended. So the end of World War II, which was the atom bomb being dropped, was then the next Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And then there's another Saturn-Pluto conjunction before the early 80s, and I don't really remember what that would have. Well, wait, 40? No, I guess. Yeah, I guess it would have been. Yeah, so then the next Saturn-Pluto conjunction was in the 80s with AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, the next Saturn-Pluto opposition will be in 2036, I believe, in the middle of Aquarius, and the nodes will also move through there, so eclipses will be in that region as well. And Pluto will also be returning to where it was when the U.S. Constitution Bill of Rights was made. So, yeah, we'll see what happens there. Perhaps we'll do another video on just kind of looking at transits and long-term predictions, because that actually is pretty interesting. If you go all the way out to the mid-50s when the next Saturn-Pluto conjunction is, there's quite a few things that are worth looking at, and it's a really interesting time to be alive. But back to the topic at hand here.
I wanted to ask you, can you just talk a little bit about what the significance is to the moon conjunct North Node in your progress chart? Yeah. So, I mean, would that be significant, or?
You know, any conjunctions. So this is important. And thank you, Sarah, for bringing this up. In the progress chart, so the moon is moving roughly 1 degree per month. I find fairly small orbs, much smaller than transits, to be relevant in the progress chart. With the progress sun, 2, maybe 2.5, 3 degrees maximum. So I would assume with the moon, probably a 2 degree orb. And then with like progress Mars, Venus, Mercury, all the other ones, 1 degree. And then you could even look at this progress chart, the outer planets really to be close, like exact. Like I was saying, when my Saturn progresses into 27 degrees, 11 minutes, it would be exactly conjunct my natal south node. And when the nodes then progress to 23 degrees, 45 minutes, it would be exactly conjunct natal Saturn. So that like down to the minute for the outer planets. To answer your question, this is an important teaching point. There's a couple things here in the progressed chart. So you have the movement of the progressed moon. So we could go back roughly a year when my progressed moon was opposite Pluto. And so all the aspects are relevant in this progressed chart, which is on astro.com called the progressed chart. Typically, in anything away from astro.com, it's referred to as secondary progressions. So in this time period when the progressed moon was opposite Pluto, first it was opposite. So my natal Pluto is more like exactly 4 degrees, that 4 degrees and 6 minutes or something like that. So it's progressed roughly 2/3 of a degree, which isn't hugely important, but then it adds an extra 40 minutes, or like 2/3 of a degree of orb to this. And so first it would have made the exact opposition to my natal Pluto when it got to 4 degrees. Let's just call it 4 degrees even. And then when it got to 4 degrees and 44 minutes, it would have been exactly opposite progressed Pluto. And so what I can tell you is in this period, it was roughly 2 months. I will say there was more of an intense like quality of emotion in my home. So like what was it, July? And then I saw that I was like, oh, my progressed moon is opposite Pluto. I was like, okay. So then to answer your question here, Sarah, so there's roughly 3 degrees of actually exactly 3 degrees of difference. My progressed north node is at 24 degrees. My natal north node is at 27 degrees. And so if you allow just 1 degree of orb, well, let's give 2 degrees. I feel like 2 degrees is probably reasonable for the progressed sun and moon, and then 1 degree for progressed Mercury, Venus, and Mars. So then when it gets to 22 degrees, it would be conjunct the progressed north node through 26 degrees, but then when it gets to 25 degrees, it would also be conjunct natal north node. So you could say when it from 22 degrees to 29 degrees, it would be conjunct my north node. And so this is a particularly relevant point when more so when the progressed sun makes an aspect to an outer planet.